together
to the talent acquisition strategy and talent session. We've got three experts in the field. First of all, I'd like to introduce Claire Marriott, who's the CEO of Newfound Australia. You heard her join me in opening the conference on Monday, and in fact, this is her baby, her idea. So congratulations, Claire, on a great initiative. We have Zoe Spicer, who's the CPO and executive coach, adjunct faculty at Holter Ashridge. And also Charlotte Stevenson's joining us from Canberra. She's a Global Talent Officer for Europe and Israel and the UK for the Australian Department of Home Affairs. Now, they've got a series of slides to go through and also some questions. But again, as we did before, I'd like to really encourage you, all of you who are on board for this session, to get involved by asking questions through the chat facility. I'll keep an eye on that. And we'll see if we can introduce those through the second half of the session, and then we'll carry on through those for the rest of the event as well. So what I'll do is I'll throw it over to you, Claire, to introduce the session, and Zoe, and then you can bring Charlotte in as you wish and go through those slides. That'd be great. Over to you, Claire.
Hi everyone, just wanted to say hello. Thank you very much, Andrew, for the introductions. Charlotte, I'm sure you'd like to take yourself off mute and say hello to everyone on board as well.
Yes, hi everybody. Charlotte Stevenson here. I work for, as Andrew mentioned, the Australian government as the Global Talent Officer responsible for Europe, UK and Israel, identifying and attracting highly skilled entrepreneurs and businesses into Australia. So very exciting role.
Perfect. And Claire, would you like to come off mute and say hi too?
Yes, thank you very much, Zoe. I'd love to say hi and welcome to everybody, and thank you for attending this session. I hope you get a lot out of it, and thank you to you, Zoe, and obviously Charlotte, thank you and enjoy.
Great to be with you. As a global people strategist, we thought it was really interesting for us to bring some of our experience, our shared experiences as a trio together from this team. And we know that talent strategies come up a lot so far as listening into a few of the other presentations, and it seems to be a bit of a red thread. So I'm sure you're all keen to hear how we're going to bring this to you as well. So I'm just going to share my screen properly. Hang on a moment. Can everyone see my screen? Perfect. Well, we know that you haven't travelled for a while, so we wanted to really use the analogy of landing talent as we think about our talent strategy. In terms of pre-flight checks, what do we do before we even land in a new market? What do we need to do when we're on the flight, in flight, thinking about our talent strategy and how we might take seats for landing as well? So let's get straight into pre-flight checks. So we are thinking about landing in a new area, and we're thinking about landing the new talent. And what's really important to Claire and I is that we've done these pre-flight checks beforehand so we can find talent for you. So when you think about understanding your global brand, do think about defining what your culture and values really stand for, because when we're going to attract people in a new market, nothing is more important than having a really well-defined global brand in terms of attracting and having a strong employee value proposition. And I know from my experience of exciting and attracting candidates that they really want to hear and be invested in your vision. So do reflect on what information is out there in the market as well, what surveys you might have done, what you really stand for. It might even be an opportunity for you to polish your brand and really think about how you're going to attract people in a new territory and be culturally relevant. So create a pitch, just like you would your sales pitch. Create a pitch to excite top talent. Think about how you can start to excite people in the market using your website. Update some images on your careers site and get people really excited and start building that talent pipeline. So you must do these things before you've even considered landing in a new territory. In terms of Australia and New Zealand, you need to really think about how you're going to employ people. This is one of the first questions I often get involved with when we're looking at new territories as we expand our global footprint. In Australia, being an employee means having a locally established entity. I know that KPMG has probably already spoken to you about establishing yourself as a business entity. So please do consider that as your primary option. There are, of course, other options. You might want to consider bringing on board contractors or a team of contractors. This can be possible, but please be aware that if they are only working for you, it may well be deemed that they're an employee and you may be subject to later fines. And the third option is an option lots of people look at, which is employing maybe a sales agent or employing through a payroll agency or an employment agency. This can be a really quick way to land in a new market, of course, but you don't have control of the resources on the ground, and often it can be very expensive too, as I'm sure you've all considered when you look at different territories before. So in terms of your talent strategy, one of the things that my clients often look at are whether they have any internal clients. Is there anyone on board in their talent program, maybe somebody that's exhibited an aspiration to live in a new territory, who can be helpful to them as they set up in a new territory? And this might be just for a period of 3 to 6 months, it might be longer. And Claire and I have had a few examples between us of that being successful and quite tricky to manage as you then bring on board what's necessary, which is the local talent to make it work. And Charlotte, I know, is really passionate about this area, and we'll talk to you about this on the next slide as well. Claire, I know you've had some experiences of internal talent as well. So how's that worked out?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's quite interesting. So you get a mixture of experiences. A lot of the time that we found in the marketplace, people, when they first go into the market, they tend to rely on referrals, and when they go into the market, they really haven't looked at what you should be looking at and how you measure the talent in the marketplace. They often take a more cost-effective or cheaper route, and they don't really understand why they've chosen that person, apart from the fact that they've just been passed on to them. And you know, when you're hiring people into the new markets, it's just so critical to get your processes right and understand why you're doing it, because it's just so expensive to get these things wrong. Not just financially, but also, you know, with the market, you miss the market. You've got 18-month window to make that impact, and you really need to understand why you're doing it. So I highly recommend really looking into what you're doing, and don't give away too much equity when you first hire in the new regions either. Make sure you take really good advice, because that can cause all sorts of problems.
Absolutely. We'll talk about compensation a little later. So Claire's obviously identified there is a combination view here, and that's really important as we bring people into a territory from maybe their internal transfers. So we can think about that when Charlotte talks about the process later. But also when we think about benchmarking candidates, use every avenue you can to make sure you get the strongest candidates in the country at the right time. So that might be, as I said on the prior slide, it might be that you start to attract and excite people using your own means through your network recommendations, your own talent pipeline. Get out there and start talking to people. The other thing that's really important to us is that you learn so much when you actually talk to the people in the country. So we often find with clients that there's kind of an education going on, and as always, a candidate process is two-way, but you learn so much as you go, and therefore you may well adapt and shift along the way. And we'll talk a little bit about those in-flight course corrections coming up as well. So all of these options are relevant, but keep your options open, and you'll find that that's really useful as you think about making the most of this fabulous new task force that was relaunched on Friday. So let's have a little chat with Charlotte and find out a little bit more about that.
Thank you so much, Zoe. So I'll first just quickly start with a little bit about the mechanics of getting your sort of people into the country when you're first sort of establishing or expanding, because as Zoe and Claire both mentioned, it's sometimes difficult to get people in. It's difficult to understand. I will be the first to admit our visa framework sometimes, and so about 18 months ago, the government announced what's called the Global Talent Program. And what that is it's really about probably your C-suite executives from a startup or a scale-up, but looking at your highly skilled innovators and entrepreneurs who are working in very future-focused fields. So fintech is definitely one of our key target sectors, and what the government offers them is a direct pathway to permanent residence. So what that does is it kind of circumvents some of those issues that Zoe was mentioning in terms of creating an entity onshore and then being able to sponsor people to come into the country. So with this pathway, this particular pathway, because you become a permanent resident straight away, you get that flexibility of being able to come in, come and go as you need to if you're maintaining operations in several countries. Obviously that's a bit difficult right now, but hopefully it won't be in the near future. But what it also allows you to do is there's no requirement for any sponsorship on the visa that we use. So for an executive who's looking to come in, or for one of your highly skilled internal candidates that you're trying to get into to really lead the expansion, it means that they can live and work anywhere. They're not tied to an entity, they're not tied to an employer. They've got that permanent residency, so if they want to take their family for however long it might be, they've got access to education, to healthcare, all of those great benefits. So that's the sort of global talent program. But as Zoe mentioned on Friday, we actually had a new initiative launched by the government, which builds on the success that we've had for this global talent program. And it's a bit of a mouthful, but it's called the Global Business and Talent Attraction Task Force. And what's fantastic about it is, whereas the global talent program, it's still running, it sits within the Department of Home Affairs where I work. This new task force is truly whole of government. So we've got a little office out here in Canberra, and we've got representatives from the immigration side of the house, from the Department of Industry, from Tax, Treasury, from the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, and very importantly from our state and territory government agencies. And so what it's all about is making sure that for high value businesses and highly skilled individuals, specifically entrepreneurs, we can really sort of wrap around that person and assist them and incentivize them to expand or set up in Australia. So it's very new. Obviously it was established on or announced on Friday, so we're all just kind of getting our feet, trying to figure out how this all works and what we can offer. But basically the offering is that we would tailor an incentives package for the right business or for the right individual. So that's hence why we have people from tax, from treasury, from industry, from home affairs. So we can basically look at the individual, look at the company and say, what do you need? What support can we give you? And what will give you the best chance of success to create jobs and to have a lasting presence in Australia? So yeah, it's really about not only bringing in external talent, so bringing in your executives and those really key individuals within your company who can help set up and make your company a success in Australia, but it's about augmenting local talent. And I am really passionate about that. It's about creating jobs and making the use of those great people that we already have in Australia. And there really is no supplement for getting that on the ground experience. And I think it's about having that balance between your internal executives and your internal talent, bringing them over. They understand the culture of your business and they can kind of translate that into our market. But you really need to understand our market and our culture, because even though the UK and Australia are very similar, we're also like in the details we are very different. So I think it's very important to get that balance right. And having said that, also one of the reasons that it's really important to look at local talent is that a lot of our visa options require labour market testing. So obviously we want Australians to be thought of first. We want Australians to be employed first. So you really need to look at local talent. If you can't find the skills you need, then other options sort of become available and visa pathways become a lot easier for you to exploit if you've done that labour market testing and for some reason you just can't find the talent on the ground. So I guess that's kind of my initial pitch on what we're offering, and really fintech is a huge area of focus for us. I listened into the call on Monday, the opening call with Senator Hume and Fintech Australia and Reinventure, and all of the things they said were just 100% what we're looking at. You know, Australia is such a great place for fintech right now. There's so many opportunities. So this task force is really sort of highlighting that even the government sees that, and they really want to do all they can to support fintechs coming into the country. So I do have an email address up there. So if you do have any questions, or if you just want to have a chat to me about the program in general, the task force, whatever that is, flick me an email and I'd be more than happy to talk to you.
Super, thank you very much. And I know, as I said earlier, talent strategies come up a lot. And I know that the fintech market's really hot. There's some fabulous talent in Australia as well. Lots of great people with good experience in the banking sector that are really keen to get involved in startups. So, you know, there are, you know, really experienced executives already in that market who are keen to join either for the first time or second or third, already been on the startup journey or now scale up. They're there and really keen. So great talent market in Australia for that as well. Thank you very much, Charlotte.
I might actually just quickly jump in because I saw that Mark had a quick question about labour market testing that I will just answer while we're on the topic. So I shouldn't be saying this, but I will. Our visa system and our visa framework is very confusing. So the labour market testing that is required is actually a little bit different depending on what visa product you're looking at bringing someone in on. So with the global talent program that I was talking about with the permanent residence visa, there's actually no labour market testing required at all. So that is a really great way that you can bring in quickly some of your top executives or very highly skilled talent to set up the company. For other visas though, your temporary skill visas, the labour market testing does vary slightly depending on what pathway you'd be bringing them in on. So usually I wouldn't point you to our website because government websites are generally not that great, but our website is actually good on this point and does actually spell out what labour market testing you would need to do to the very minute details in terms of how many advertisements you'd have to do to then be able to say you couldn't actually find an Australian worker with the skills you need. So have a look there, and if it still doesn't answer your questions, Mark, happy for you to flick me an email.
Thank you, Mark, for the question. Thank you, Charlotte. Please do use the chat if anything pops up along the way, or chime in. We're always happy to hear from you. So in terms of local market testing, what's really important to Charlotte and I will be that we're really clear about what the role scope would be. So we thought we'd talk about a little bit around design and compensation philosophy, because knowing what you need in the market is part of that process of making sure that it's clear in terms of whether we need to bring somebody in, will we ever get sign off for that, or how we then go to market with our talent strategy. You may have experience of this as well. You may have gone into new markets elsewhere in the world. You might know that you want to go sales first. You might know that you actually need to bring together sales and pre-sales, or it may be that it's sales marketing or a straightforward sort of GM type role. So have a think about your experience so far. What is it that is successful for you, or what do you think indeed will be successful in the Australian market? We can certainly help you more with that. And as it relates to salary surveys, etc., again, very important if you're thinking about expanding using internal talent or bringing somebody into the market, being really clear about what you're willing to pay is not only important from that point of view, but certainly as you start to entice and attract candidates from either big sort of finance backgrounds or into startups for the first time, making sure we're very specific and clear about what salary range you're looking at and how the variable might work, especially for those GM roles or those sales roles. When you think about commission structure, it might be something that you've got a global sales commission plan that you can use, you can port over. You might want to think about having more sort of key sales objectives in there rather than revenue targets or gross profit margin, for example. So we can certainly think about that as part of the talent strategy. So let's be really clear about what our compensation philosophy is so that it can be really exciting for candidates when we start to talk about that. And then in the Australian market, as with many others, we do need to consider the employee benefits. So what are we willing to offer? And I've put some sort of baseline in there in terms of what we should be offering. Obviously, you may have other global benefits that you would tie into that market as well, but very important that you consider those and you're aware of what you're willing to offer so that we can again be really attracting the right candidates. And especially as we think about this new normal, let's all be really clear around whether we're going to build a new office environment, where there'll be a serviced office environment, or whether we're going to have our teams as virtual teams working from home. All of these things are really important to us as we start to build that picture of who we need, what we need, where we need them, and how we're going to employ them. So we've done our pre-flight checks and we're now in flight. And what's really a passionate area for Claire and I is really making sure that all of the candidates in the process, whether they're candidates that join and flow right through the process to the end point, or maybe just in that initial stage, have a very, very positive experience, because it's so important that your brand is very strong when we're looking to build new talent base in new sectors in the market. So Claire, maybe you can talk to us about some of your experiences and take us through this slide.
Yes, thank you, Zoe. This is critical, as all of these parts are. So just to touch on the leadership brand, excuse me, it's really important to understand who your leadership are, why they're there, why they joined the business. Because people join people, don't they, at the end of the day? You know, it's not always the business they join. They want to join the team. They want to join a company where they can make a difference or add a huge amount of value. So understand what that is, understand what the leadership values are, understand, you know, how they motivate, lead the team, how they deal with challenges, maybe have some examples of successes that they've had in the past, and also some challenges, because people don't always want to hear the good stories. You know, sometimes the war stories are just as interesting for them. So then we go on to role. Now, when you're hiring, it's really important to have a great job description, or whatever you want to call it. We see far too often, especially for some of those really senior roles, we see far too often just very basic, generic job descriptions. So, you know, I really recommend you work with somebody who's got a marketing mind or can create a message that really speaks from the heart, from the business, about why you're looking for this role and, you know, why they're going to join, and think about really creative ways to, and I'm really happy to send examples around this, by the way. I've got some great stuff that, you know, has really attracted fantastic talent, because it speaks to the human rather than just the facts about the job. Make sure you're clear about the process. Be really clear about this, because it can drift if you're not smart and you're not not smart, but if you're not careful. Make sure that you're very clear about the process with the people that you're hiring, so they understand what, you know, because there's a lot of time for them to invest. We've all been through the interview process, you know, somewhere along our careers, and we know what that can take. So work backwards from that if you can, and make sure that all the decision makers are on board and have times in their diaries. Because we can all hit holiday season and then the decision can just drift again because we haven't thought about that. Make sure also, you know, the offers, sometimes we get to the offer place and it's not ready, especially around paperwork, or it's not signed off, or there's just little things that just slow it down. And if that's the case, be really clear about the communication around that. And again, about the timeline, you may have a launch event, you may have a kickoff event, or you may have lots of other different moving parts in the business that you need to think about when someone's joining your business. So be mindful of that really as well. And again, you know, this is a sales cycle, so make sure all the decision makers are lined up and all the ticks are in the right boxes for the approved process. I'm sorry about my throat. So candidate feedback. Now, this is a really interesting grey area. Well, it's not grey, but it's really interesting, because when you use services like, you know, Zoe and I worked very closely together. We've taken many companies on global journeys. How do you manage that candidate feedback? You know, how do you make sure that you've got a clear picture if there are any red flags showing in the candidate process? You know, make sure that they walk away feeling as good about the business as you feel about, you know, the information they've given you, because it's not a one-way street. It really isn't. It's a two-way street. And it's really important, even if you don't want to hire them, that they're out there talking about you in a really passionate way, and share the fact that they had a great experience. Again, remember, this is a sales process and it must be two-way. And it's also a learning process as well. You know, I mean, you know, how well have you done when you've been pitching the business? Or don't make sure that you don't go back into applicants and talk to them about their CV again. Make sure the transfer of the data and the information gathered at the previous meetings is really shared and really clear, because we've all done that as well, haven't we? You know, we've sat around the table and, oh, what are we doing here? We're being asked again. Anyway, that's really important. And filling the candidate pipeline, you know, you meet great people on the journey. Make sure you stay in touch with them. Make sure that, you know, you build, I would call a romance, because it is really important that you create a journey and experience for these people that they will remember. Because when they join your organization, if you choose that, then they start in such a different place from, you know, if they feel they've been taken care of, they feel that they've been respected, and they feel as if they've been listened to, you know, and that's really important too, because when they start, you want them flying when they join your business. You know, you want them totally engaged. You need them to be open to everything, learning, values, culture, people, operations, everything that goes with the first couple of months of joining a business. And be aware of the buyer's remorse, because every single person will go through, even if it's 1 minute of, what's this all about? Don't remember. You know, they will have that space where they might be losing confidence for that minute. So just be aware it's a human experience for them.
Super, thank you, Claire. So true. And one of the things that we obviously guide lots of clients through is just making sure that we really maintain those positive feelings throughout. And what's important to me is as they start to be onboarded as well when we get to hire phase. But as Claire said, sometimes we have to make course corrections. So it might be that we start to gain information from the market we weren't expecting. We might need to manage some feedback along the way, or it may even be that internally we're dealing with uncertainty and different shifting priorities. It might be that we meet a great candidate, but they aren't actually the candidate that fits the role that we were looking for. And therefore it might be a really interesting conversation with Claire and I around, well, okay, we weren't thinking we'd see somebody that just wowed us so much, and we're really passionate about finding the right role for this individual. How do we make that work? How can we kind of course correct and find a role for this person? Or it might be that we hear things from the candidate along the way, and we need to just make sure that we're continuing to have a dialogue with them around changes that are happening. One of the things I did want to pull up for you, though, is that overhiring can be sometimes the right thing to do, but often lead to other issues. So we can get so excited about so many candidates, and actually we need to really stick with what the business needs. So one of the things I often do is kind of take people back to, I know you're really excited about this candidate, but for example, they've already said that they're looking for more autonomy and responsibility, and actually this role doesn't have any people managers, and actually it's a pure sales role, and we just want somebody that will go out there and hunt some big deals for us, for example. Or it might be that you get right to closing stages and you think you're with a final candidate and you extend a verbal offer, and then suddenly something changes, either with them or with us in a startup capacity. Or it might be that you need to offboard people. So things do go wrong along the way, and we have managed many scenarios where things have changed along the way, and that's just part of life. Look at the extraordinary year we're having right now. So please take professional advice and bring on board people that can really help you with that level of uncertainty that we're working all in this kind of volatile and uncertain world. I wanted to really bring your attention to this idea of using the process as an opportunity for you to learn as organisations as well. Matthew Syed has written this great book on black box thinking. So using again the analogy of landing talent and flight mentality, he talks about how black box thinking allows us to replay events just like a black box does in the aviation industry. And he talks about how we can apply the black box thinking to other industries. And here in the UK, for example, this has been applied in the NHS, where we did have a very traditional view of feedback not necessarily being a good thing. So feedback is at the heart of every different process, and we have to have that as part of our own improvement and growth. And I know, working with senior leaders globally, that as we get more experienced, we often think we know all of the answers, and actually we need to listen and get that feedback from the bottom up, continue to be open to that, and that blame is entirely counterproductive. We just need to move on. So have a look at it, because you might enjoy reading Matthew's work. It's a very interesting view, but I thought it fits nicely with the analogy we're using today. So moving on to landing talent, this is the exciting piece that we all love to sort of say you're hired and bring people on board and really close out that experience and think about how we're going to onboard people. As Claire said, it's really important that we're prepared for that offer process. It might be making sure that you've partnered with a people strategist around knowing what the offer documentation needs to be, what checks you need to do, what the process needs to include. Are there things that you have ready to go, like NDAs or bonus plans that we can use, or do we need to look at those again fresh for a new market? If we don't have that, we don't have things documented, I'm sure I'm not the only person on the call that has had all sorts of experience with promises, expectations raised, and aspirations for employment that were never written down, never signed up to, and lead us to areas of all sorts of complexity and confusion. So let's get it nailed before we get to the first day and make sure that we know exactly what we expect of our new people joining the team, but importantly, what they expect of us. In terms of HR operations, it's obviously very important to make sure we're set up and ready to hire in the local territory. All sorts of providers out there in terms of local payroll, but it's certainly something that I would get involved in with clients around how we're doing it in other territories. Should we be switching to a global provider? Can we use the same provider? Or indeed going through a simple route like using your accounting firm can be, you know, as straightforward as it gets. We would obviously need to think about how we're going to manage benefits. Generally, when it's ones or twos starting in a new territory, we might just looking at personal setup of benefits because group plans aren't available. But again, it's important we have a local broker, because I think it extends that level of credibility and trust. If you can say to somebody new in the market, hey, go and work with this person because we recommend their services, rather than sort of saying, well, go and sort it out yourselves. So again, it's about extending that. We know what we're doing, making people feel really certain and assured that they're joining a company with a plan. Local employment compliance, something that Charlotte and I will work on together as well, is just making sure that people have the right to work. You wouldn't believe how many people suddenly land with a tourist visa and think they can be meeting people. Say no more. So data protection regulation, I know here in the UK and in wider Europe, GDPR has been a huge area for us over the last couple of years, but it is really a bit of a gold stamp. So many people will have their privacy policies and notices in place, but something to think about as we think about data protection when we're in the Australian market as well. What we can do in terms of credit or criminal checks, not necessarily for all of your local employees, but it might be relevant for anyone coming into a finance role or into a senior role where they're going to have authority to sign off on your behalf. And what sorts of diversity and inclusion requirements are required. D&I has become a huge issue globally. I'm sure that we've all got it on our global objectives as we start to think about our culture and values as organisations. So it's really important that you have that compliance as well. near and dear to my heart, especially given some of the IPOs I've been involved in. It's really important that you have an HR system. It gets so tricky and so sticky when you don't do this early on. It's not very expensive. Get yourself organized and set up from the get-go with a subscription service, and have a system that works for you, that can really help you with all of those prior issues. So HR operations aside, let's get excited about bringing somebody on and making them successful from day one. So managing communications proactively with employees and the internal teams. Have a communication plan. Think really hard about how you're going to communicate this. It's not only a new person joining the team, but it's a statement about your vision for your business. It's a growth statement. It's exciting. It might be people that are internally transferring. It might be somebody coming on board. It's a huge opportunity for you to talk about your vision for the business. So think about your plan. Have an onboarding plan, not only from day one and week one, but throughout that first 90 days. And it might be, doing some team development activities as well, especially in this virtual world we're operating in. That's becoming more and more important, to get people together and talk about things other than work or tactical issues. Do agree and document some goals and milestones so that you do have an opportunity, a weekly, regular one-to-one, especially when you're not in territory. You will spend an inordinate amount of time as a leader on these one-to-ones. That's your role, and it's so important when somebody comes on board that they have those check-ins, those regular times where they can just feedback what they're working on and seek your support, get feedback from you. You can ask for feedback from them. You can continually have a dialogue. How's it going? What are you hearing? How are you feeling about it? Are we meeting your expectations? Because remote management takes a lot of time and energy, and you really need to be up for that and absolutely available as people join your organization. And for that reason, internal buddies or an external coach is a really good way forward. And Claire and I have seen lots of success with that. Not only does it give somebody new an opportunity and an outlet to share in a confidential way with other people, but it also gives you a team of people that are watching and shepherding that person to success over those first few months. So a few things to think about as you hire people and bring them on board there too. But I'd love, Claire, if you've got anything to talk about onboarding, please do join in before we get to the let's hear from the audience stage.
Thank you. Yeah, onboarding is absolutely critical, because people have just made a big decision in their lives, and you've made a big decision in your business to hire this person, especially if you're in different geographies. And I've done this. I came to Australia to build the APAC region out for Newfound. And I've been to Australia many times, and I thought I knew it. And the cultural nuances when you're doing business in different regions, they're huge. They're even huge when you come to Sydney and Melbourne. The differences in those two markets can really throw you. So when you're onboarding, make sure that people feel that they've really joined the business, especially if you're doing it virtually. Make sure that they meet lots of people in the business so they know, how the corporate works or the bigger business works back at HQ or the mothership, as it's sometimes referred to. But make sure that they understand all the different personalities. And if you do any personality profiling, I don't know if there's something that you think about, but it might even be worth, being really open about that, so you can identify all the different thinkers in the team. And that can, really help people to communicate clearer and understand each other's thinking. And I found that to be so valuable with some of the companies that we work with. It does take a lot of courage to be really open about that, but it does make a huge difference. It's just something else to think about. And stay in contact with all the things that Zoe said. We see mistakes being made, miscommunications being made, and you can save yourself from all of that, especially with this new world that we're living in. It's becoming more and more, even if you're in the same city, you have to be onboarded virtually. So just take care of your people, and treat them the way you'd love to be treated yourself, and it will work. It really will.
Thank you, Claire. Perfect. Well, if everyone would like to take themselves off of mute and even put their webcams on. We'd love to see a few more faces. Certainly fed up with seeing my own for sure. So we're landing talent, but we'd really love to hear more from you. So maybe Andrew could help us here and chaperone a little discussion about what actions you might be taking as well as part of today's learning, or what's had the biggest impact from you. So let's have a look at who we've got online, coming off mute. Maybe Mark, you seem to be top of the stack and off mute. Maybe you could join us first. What's on your mind? What actions are you going to take?
You've got two Marks on the call. Are you referring to me, Mark B, or
Yep,
Mark A?
Mark B, please.
Mark B, yep.
Okay, well, to be honest, I'm here as a guest of Claire's and Peter's, and just reviewing the content, and I thought it was excellent. So thank you for that. I've actually, you've shared with me one or two points that I'm going to add to my lexicon.
Brilliant.
But other than that, so I'm probably not the right person to ask the question you've just asked.
Zoe, I have got a question that I wanted to ask you. You know, what are some of the variations we should consider when we're hiring internationally? There must be different themes and variations on hiring as you go around the globe.
Yeah, no, absolutely there are. I wish it was as straightforward as a sort of cutout template. I guess the biggest one for me, and I referenced it earlier today, is how we will employ. Unfortunately, in Australia, it's not this way, but in some territories, you can employ without an entity. So I always have like a little mini celebration when I'm allowed to do that, because I know that I can extend the nearest local entity's employment to somebody and land people quite quickly. So that's something for me that I'm, you know, very aware of. It's like, okay, I'm really excited about you going into a new territory, but let's be really clear about how we can employ somebody legally, because obviously that can get us into particularly hot water. Then when we think about an employee brand or an employee value proposition, why somebody might join you as an organization, one of the things that I'd get involved in is just making sure it's culturally sensitive. Obviously, as you go around the world, there are different things that appeal to different people in different ways. So, so being aware of that, getting some local feedback on how a global brand might land in the territory would be really important too.
And Claire, you mentioned before, you touched on it, but you didn't go into detail. What's the cost of talent like in Australia? I know it's not inexpensive, but could you maybe unpack that a little bit for us?
Yes, thank you. It's always a surprise to anybody we're bringing into Australia. Always a surprise. The talent here is much more expensive than it would be in London, for example. Obviously, it depends where the dollar is, but just, you know, I'd say it's, depending on the city, but I would say it's at least 30 or 40% more expensive than you'd imagine. So be really careful about, and if you want to hire real talent, you know, you're going to have to pay that extra, as you would do in any market. So make sure you do your market research, and make sure you're really clear about, you know, what the packages are, because you might have to make you might have to challenge what you need depending on what your budgets are. I always recommend, and you know, you'll know this by the people that you're interviewing here, and the more you understand about the market, but just be really, really careful about that, because it's a shock.
Excellent. I might ask Zoe, actually, no, I'm going to ask Claire, what is the most common candidate feedback following a selection process that you've found?
That's a big question.
Yeah, that's why I asked it.
What's the common one? It's normally around how they feel when they come out, and the information that they've been given. You know, we often have to help companies understand why, before they go, you know, into the interview process, why this person is arriving, why they have considered this opportunity. Because when you're hiring talent, they're not necessarily just on the marketplace just to walk through the door and go, yeah, hire me. You know, they're in it, and that's when we were talking earlier about it being a two-way street. So they often talk about yeah, how they feel when they went in, the type of conversation they had. How did the conversation marry up with the values of the business? That can be really tricky sometimes. How they were interviewed, and again, when we went into the CV thing, you know, they don't want to be asked the same questions about their CV. So be really careful about asking really interesting questions about that person, because they want to be heard. You know, this is a 50-50 exchange. It's not because you're the interviewer, you get, you know, 70 or 80% of the questions. You know, you want them to walk out and think, wow, that was just a great opportunity. We often get a lot of feedback about miscommunication if you're not talking about the positives, and how they're not streamlined in the process. So one person said this, one person said that, but that's bound to happen in a lot of cases, and that can be managed very easily, because that's, you know, sometimes the human piece. But make sure that, you know, together when you're doing an interview process, you have had the chance to speak as a team, the hiring team and the decision makers, about who's doing what in the process.
Absolutely. And I'd say, Claire, the thing I hear most often is they want feedback. They want really good feedback. They want to know how they've performed. They want to know why they're through to the next stage. So don't miss that opportunity to make them feel amazing, because you can give them some really positive feedback about what you've heard and why they're moving to the next stage. And on vice versa, you know, people that are dropping out of the process, as we said earlier, maintaining your employee brand is really important in a new market as you're landing. So making sure that you kind of give people enough feedback that they can leave the process with grace is really important. And in today's world, going back to black box thinking, everyone wants to learn from whatever process they're in. So give them the benefit of that feedback.
I was about to say the exact same thing, actually. Sorry, Claire.
No, you go, Charlotte. Go.
I was going to say the exact same thing, actually. So I think feedback is so important, and I know that it's a time, you know, it's a time challenge, and it does, depending on how many candidates you've got and how many people you have to speak to, but actually just taking the time to provide that feedback, especially to the people who may have dropped out. I think especially in the Australian market as well, we love feedback, and we love to know that their connection is still there. And so if you leave an interview, or if you get that feedback and you still have that positive outlook on the company or the individual who's been interviewing you, that connection's still there. And whether you become like right for the role or there's another opportunity later on, I think maintaining that connection and maintaining that positivity is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Just as you would in a sales process, because you just don't know who that candidate knows. They might be able to refer somebody else. They might know somebody else in the process, and you don't want anyone put off that kind of attraction stage.
Yeah, please don't give anybody feedback if you can, just not a cultural fit. We hear that so often. And, you know, as you said, Charlotte, just take a little bit of time. These people have invested a huge amount of time. They may have taken time off work. You know, they've told their friends. You know, be really mindful of the fact that, you know, where they are in their cycle, and make sure your brand is something that they think about in the future kindly as well, and they talk fondly of you. Fondly isn't the right word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I know that when we work with people on the process, just having, it's really easy to give people feedback as to why they're successful or why they're dropping out of the process if you're really clear about maybe the 5 or 6 competencies you're looking for, or the behaviors that you're looking for. So when we work with clients around the process, we'll be really clear about what is it in the role profile, what would a successful candidate look like, and then when you are giving that feedback, you can circumvent some of that prep time, as Charlotte said, to kind of go, actually, I know the 2 areas that I was kind of like having a red flag about. So I'm just going to give them some really specific examples of what we were looking for and why they would be successful, or, you know, what we didn't see and therefore we don't think they would be successful. And that's what people want to hear, really specifics on competencies or behaviors. Passionate about that one, weren't we, Andrew?
Yeah. Now here's a question for you. And Zoe, you mentioned getting some software to support the HR function, but at what stage do you consider hiring an in-house talent acquisition team or HR team? And then a second part to that question is, who do you get to hire the hirers?
Well, okay, so yeah, it's a great question. I typically we would look at a ratio of about 100 employees to a full-time HR role. One of the issues that we would see is that most people's growth plan might indicate how quickly they might want to have people in-house. So if you know your growth plan is going to take you from 10 to 100 in a year, you might want to start bringing a team in internally more quickly. However, what typically happens is the money that can be provided to bring on board an HR or a talent acquisition team member might only buy you a junior level of skills and experience in that market. So often that needs to be we need to build upon that experience. So having access to people either at board level or on your advisory group who can give you that 24/7 expert advice is really important, even if you do have an HR manager or a talent acquisition person on the ground, because it's very hard for them to be successful unless they've had these experiences. And to get that in the market, as Claire said, in Australia, is incredibly expensive. Hence, that tipping point is actually quite large.
And also, who do they report to in the business? That's something that's often missed. It goes into finance or operations or whatever, and it needs to have a different mindset to be able to drive that and get better outcomes.
Yeah. And that comes to who does the hiring. So something that I've been involved in is putting together those on the ground teams, of course, and then chaperoning their success. So it might be that I have oversight of their people strategy for a while. It might be that I mentor or I coach those teams. It might be that then I'm the person that sort of reports back to the CFO or to the CEO, depending on how that reporting structure works. So lots of different options. But obviously, when you are investing so much in a new territory, you want the people that have had those experiences before in the team.
Charlotte, a question for you off the cuff, and that is that Australia is often perceived as a very relaxed and comfortable place to live and work and so on, but we actually have some fairly well-defined workplace expectations for employees here in Australia. How would you describe the Australian sort of workplace environment for employees to employers, and what sort of things would people that are looking to start up in Australia need to consider when they're hiring Australians that maybe they haven't thought of back home?
Oh, that is a tough question, actually. I mean, personally, I am still quite easygoing and laid back at work. I think that we do have that environment. Working in government, obviously you have to consider that it's a very hierarchical environment there, and there are like very, very sort of clear structures in place that you have to adhere to. But I think working in other companies, generally structures are fairly flat. I think that Australians actually, they respond very well to that, having that connection to senior executives. Also, and I mean, this may not be sort of the perspective or the answer you were looking for, but I guess in the government context, and I don't actually know how well this would translate into the private sector, because I probably shouldn't admit this here, but I've never actually worked in the private sector. I'm a career public servant, but I think that Australians in general, wherever they work, love that information flow. So in government, it's very hard because there's this principle of need to know, and sometimes you have, your higher level executives who aren't able to provide that level of detail down about, what's going on, where the company is going. And I think that sometimes leads to frustration because people don't know where they're going, they don't know where the company's going, and that can sort of affect the culture. So I think that I guess that's something that you need to consider, is that just be as open as possible with your employees, bring them along on the journey, let them know what the strategy is, but then also how you're going to get there. I think that we kind of thrive on that here, being part of it along the way.
Yep.
Yeah, there's no doubt we have a high level of transparency here in Australia, expectation of it, don't we, Zoe?
No, we absolutely do, and I think a flat organisational structure really helps with that as well, and a leadership style that really encourages suggestions and feedback and really being in it together. Very much in Australia, but actually I'm seeing that typically in other locations as well, that we're flattening our structures and making leadership more accessible than we used to be. So certainly something to think about as we lead into new territories is just thinking about how you show up, what your brand stands for, how you can be on message with these different, groups of employees and make yourself as accessible as possible.
And I think it's a bit easier now as well, or it definitely is in the government environment in terms of making the executives more visible. Getting on a call with all of your staff and actually just being present, being there, I think is really, really important. And I think very important if you are managing your business from offshore, really just engaging as much as possible with your employees in Australia.
Yeah, there's no doubt the technology these days, and look at us now, video conferencing all over the world means that there aren't many excuses for not being present if you're a leader across a team these days. Now, there's a question there from Mark Brond. Are experienced fractional resources readily available in Australia to help with the HR talent management requirements? Who'd like to take that one?
I'll give that to Charlotte.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Okay, I'll take that one. Yes, they are, Mark. Yeah, they are. They're definitely here. You can get some great HR talent, for 1 or 2 days a month that could really help you, or more if you need that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have quite a few contacts and network in the HR and TA space on the ground in Australia. So lots of network to share here.
Is
and
the HR...
well, I will actually, sorry, I will jump in, Andrew. From a government perspective, so I apologise, but there are actually a lot of connections that I can make as well into different, I guess, talent acquisition stakeholders and contacts across state governments and the federal government as well. So I guess that's something also to consider, is that you may have people that you can call on in the federal government for assistance, but then you also need to look at what state and territory you're going into and what you can possibly get out of the representatives there as well, because a lot of the time your state or territory representatives, whether you're in Victoria or New South Wales, they'll actually have more to offer you, more to be able to provide better contacts than sometimes the federal government will be able to. So making sure that you engage with all of those levels is really important.
Excellent. Okay. Well, look, I'd like to ask for any last questions before we wrap the sessions up from our participants. I think this has been another fantastic session. I've learned a lot out of this already. I learned a lot from you, Charlotte, as well, from the Canberra perspective, which is fantastic. Zoe, I think you've put some great slides there together. They'll be available, I take it, for our participants if they're wishing to get a copy. Is that okay for you?
Absolutely, yeah. And there'll be a recorded version as well for any catch-ups. And Claire and I are available to catch up with any individuals who would like to come to us directly and follow up with any questions that they might have, as I'm sure Charlotte will be on Charlotte's address that she shared earlier.
Exactly. And that's a good point. I want to highlight to all of the participants that it's easy to get any information you need from Liz Wood, who you've been dealing with as you've been coming into the virtual market mission. Liz Wood's email address is liz.wood@newfound.global, and she's available to respond to any request that you might have on any information you've got or any of the sessions that are coming up. So look, without any further questions, I'd like to thank our panel members today, our 3 speakers today, who've given us great insights into HR. There's a lot more involved there than I thought. I've never had to run an HR function, and I'm glad I've never had to do that, because it's awfully complicated and very demanding, particularly at the moment. I'm hoping that 2021 is going to be the reverse of what 2020 has been for you, in that it's going to be a lot more about hiring new talent and a lot more about building businesses as they go into the recovery stage after this COVID-19. I'm pretty confident that that's going to be the case. And I was saying to Claire only yesterday that I think, like the 1920s was the boom decade, I think the 2020s is going to be the boom decade after what's being a pretty difficult 2020 for most people. So thank you, all three of you, for this great session. And we're going to wrap up now. So tomorrow's session kicks off at 5 p.m. Tomorrow's session is about the trade and regulatory environment. We've got some brilliant speakers for that. But what we're also going to do, and I'm going to ask you to come together a little bit early. We're going to ask all the members of the cohort to come together at 6:15 New Zealand time, that's 6:15 p.m, 7:15 a.m. in the UK, I think that's 8:15 a.m. in Sweden, and even 10:45 a.m. in India. And that's 6:15 in Australia, I believe. No, sorry, that's 4:15 in Australia. That's right, 4:15. So all those different timeframes, you can see what we're trying to manage here. And come together a little early so we can get some of you to meet each other, talk to each other, share some war stories, and also ask questions of each other. And you never know, you might find someone that's almost on the same journey that you could end up doing business with before you even land, or as you're landing in Australia. So I encourage you to connect together earlier on the same address that you've been sent for the normal kickoff time. So just keep that in mind, 45 minutes early, and we'd love to see you there. So without any further ado, I'd like to thank you all, sign off for tonight, and we hope to see you early tomorrow for the kickoff of the trade and regulatory environment. Thank you again, speakers. Thank you again, cohort.
Thank you very much. That's fantastic.
And we look forward to seeing you early. Indeed.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Andrew.
Good night.
Thanks,
Yes,
everyone.
thank you, and it's great. Thank you, Charlotte.
Bye, everyone. Thanks,
Bye.
Charlotte.
Bye.
You were amazing. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Yeah.
I was just seeing who's still on. Well done, everyone.
Right.
Good job, team.
Good work.
Yeah, well done, Calypso, for getting Charlotte on board. That was great.
That was really good work.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
excellent.
thank you, Calypso. That was Charlotte was great. I just so enjoyed speaking to her yesterday. She's great. She's a great addition to our network.
Oh, good. I'm so pleased. Yeah, it just felt
Well
like
found.
she could add some value there. I didn't see the whole thing, unfortunately, but I just caught the tail end. But yeah, but you're all pleased with how that went.
Yeah, that was a good session. Very good. Zoe, great work.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. No, thank you for sort of hosting us. I have to say, I was a little bit disappointed by the numbers on the